Nils searched everywhere for the whereabouts of the wild geese. He quietly climbed into a carriage and followed the family to the outskirts of Stockholm. Unfortunately, it suddenly started raining heavily. In the suburbs, several curved and wide rivers intertwined with each other and slowly flowed into the distance. Both sides of the river were covered with grass and trees, and raised mountains lay on the vast expanse of land. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, and the family of 3 had to hide in the carriage to avoid the rain. At this time, the boy's father told the legend about this mountain. A long time ago, this was an uninhabited mountainous area, with no birds, animals, fish, insects, flowers, trees, and even rain, snow, wind, and frost. Occasionally, there were a few clouds floating in the sky. On the top of the highest mountain lived a giant couple. They are so huge that they seem to be able to reach the clouds in the sky if they stand up. Their house was like a huge palace, except it looked so lonely. One day the giant was sharpening his broadsword outside the house. A figure slowly approached in the distance. The giant was very puzzled. No one had passed by here for hundreds of years. Besides, who wouldn't run away in fear when they saw me? Suddenly, the giant seemed to remember something, and the sweat on his forehead kept dripping down. The hand sharpening the knife shook violently, and the corners of his mouth kept trembling because of fear. The giant quickly ran back into the house, closed the door tightly with a bang, and leaned against the door, breathing heavily. The giant's wife was sitting by the fireplace knitting socks. Seeing her husband in such a panic, she hurriedly asked, "You are so panicked. What happened?" The giant replied, "Asdo is here. He must be here to challenge me." "Use your magic to stop him first," his wife said. After hearing this, the giant hurriedly opened the door and cast magic. But in less than 3 seconds, the door was slammed shut by the giant again. "It's too late. He's already at the door. I have to hide," he said and ran into the back room to hide. The giant's wife shook her head helplessly. She could only find a way to deal with this uninvited guest. She calmly knitted socks again. At this time, there was a knock on the door. "Open the door quickly! I want to settle the score with the giant!" Before the female giant could get up, the door was pushed open with a bang. A burly, extremely strong giant stood at the door, waving his fists viciously. He didn't look very tall. He wore an iron ring with horns on his head and a hammer on his waist. "Asdo, why are you here?" The giant's wife looked at the warrior in front of her and said casually, "However, you came at the wrong time. My husband went out hunting, so you should come back another day." Asdo shouted, "No, you are occupying this land and people cannot live here. I must talk to him." The giant's wife said helplessly, "Then you can only wait here. I'll pour you some wine to warm yourself up." So Asdo walked towards the female giant. The strange thing is that he walked for a long time, and when he looked back, he only took a small step away from the door. The further he walked, the more he realized how huge the house was. Asdo had to run forward. When he reached the giant's wife, he had to look up at this huge woman. We giants like to live in big houses. You see, even such a big house is still too narrow for my husband. You have to know that he can walk around the entire house in a few steps, the giant's wife said. The giant's wife freed her chair for Asdo to sit in. The chair was so big that Asdo looked like a child, and it took a lot of effort to climb up. The giant's wife went to a corner of the house where there were several huge wine barrels. The giant's wife fetched a wooden barrel cup, placed it on the ground, pulled out the stopper on the barrel, and the mead flowed into the wooden barrel cup. The cup was half as big as Asdo's body. Seeing the wine getting more and more full, he kept saying, "Enough, enough." The giant's wife smiled and said, "My husband can usually drink 6 large cups at a time," she said, picking up the cork and preparing to plug the barrel. However, the cork could not close the mouth of the barrel, and the mead poured out continuously until it flowed out of the cup and onto the floor. The giant's wife begged, "Asdo, you are strong. Can you help me put the stopper in?" Asdo immediately ran over to help. He put the stopper on the mouth of the barrel, picked up the hammer and hit it hard. But as soon as he let go, the plug was pushed out again. Asdo tried to block the mouth of the barrel again and again, but failed. The giant's wife said disappointedly, "Usually my husband just presses lightly, and the mouth of the barrel is blocked. It seems that your strength is not enough compared to him. I think you should go back." He was angry and ashamed, but he still insisted on staying and waiting for the giant. The mead flowed more and more, reaching almost every corner of the floor. At this time, Asdo came up with a way and walked out of the house. He used the horns of his helmet to draw deep grooves on the ground, and used the hammer to knock out many large pits on the ground. The mead flowed into the large pits along the deep grooves. After Asdo finished doing this, he leaned back on the chair to rest. The giant's wife said, "You must be tired after doing all this for me. Let me cook some porridge for you. But we have run out of flour at home. Without flour, we cannot cook thick and sticky porridge. Can you help me?" Asdo grabbed the handle and turned the millstone vigorously, but it was too heavy. He used all his strength to move it only once. At this time, the giant's wife said, "My husband usually grinds flour for me. You must know that he can easily make 10 or 8 turns with only one hand. In terms of strength, you are really no match for him. You'd better go back." "I still think we should wait for him to come back," Asdo whispered, with a clear lack of courage and courage in his tone. "Well, I'll make your bed. It's getting late, so you can stay the night," said the giant's wife. "There are many cushions and mattresses on the bed. I'm afraid you might think the bed is too hard, but you know my husband sleeps on this bed every day." When Asdo was lying on the bed, he found that there were pits and unevenness under his body, making it impossible to sleep. He tossed and turned, still uncomfortable. So, he sat up, lifted all the things on the bed, and found that the bed was covered with angular stones. So he angrily picked up the stones and threw them in all directions. Asdo's strength was too great. Rocks flew everywhere. The giant's house was smashed into a mess, and the walls were full of cracks. The giant's wife was also frightened and hid with her husband to discuss with him. "I have tried all the ways I can think of. It seems that we can only leave here." After that, they turned into 2 puffs of smoke and disappeared. The giant's house also disappeared. At this time, Asdo discovered that the ditches flowing with mead had turned into rivers. The large pits made with hammers had turned into lakes, and the stones he had thrown had turned into mountains. What was turned out on the stone mill was fertile soil, covering the entire mountainous area. Moistened by the river, various green grasses and trees grew here, and many birds, insects, and animals also came to live here. Slowly, humans migrated here and lived a peaceful and happy life from then on. The rain stopped, the story ended, and Neil listened with rapt attention. He was deeply attracted by this legend, so he jumped out of the carriage and carefully observed this magical land. Neil didn't know how long it had been before he suddenly heard the cry of wild geese overhead. This was the longest time they had been apart since the trip. Everyone was very happy to be reunited, and they embarked on a new journey together.